I'm Alexis Monroe Admiral in the United States Navy. Today is my wedding day and the day my father said the last thing he could to break me. Admiral on deck. 196 men stood. My father went silent. No one at the wedding knew who they were. They weren't on the guest list. They didn't sit with the others. They didn't toast. They just stood in full combat uniform, eyes fixed on me, and saluted in unison. Seconds before that, my father had laughed. A dry, hollow sound, followed by a sentence he had kept in his chest for years. Still pretending, Alexis. He once wore the rank of colonel. He thought he understood the military. He thought I didn't belong in it. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I walked slowly past the pews. No white dress, just my service whites. The medals didn't speak, but the silence of 196 men behind me said everything that needed to be said. No one in the room understood what was happening, except me and them. About 3 years ago, during a classified operation, I made a decision, one that broke a rule but saved lives. That same decision fractured everything between my father and me. He never forgave it. He never asked why. But that's also the reason those 196 men are standing here today. Follow me and I'll show you why they came. Why my father didn't speak to me for 3 years. And what finally made an entire chapel fall silent for the woman he once called a fraud. I don't stop walking. The chapel isn't large, but it feels endless. I can hear the subtle shift of heels and polished dress shoes on marble as people begin to rise, unsure of what's expected of them. Some remain seated, some whisper. One man drops his champagne flute. It doesn't shatter, just rolls quietly down the aisle, circling itself like it's trying to avoid the silence settling in. The photographer doesn't lift his camera. My brother doesn't blink. The pastor looks confused, flipping through his script as if he missed a cue. I keep walking. To my right, my mother's fingers are clutched around the armrest. Her face is still, but her knuckles are white. To my left, my father hasn't moved since the words were spoken. Admiral on deck. His mouth is still parted, just slightly caught between a grin and a grimace. He didn't stand. Of course he didn't. He hasn't stood for me in years. Behind me, 196 pairs of boots remain planted firm and square in perfect formation. I don't look at them. I don't need to. They're not here for show, and they're certainly not here for revenge. They're just here. My fiancé stands at the front of the altar, holding his breath like the rest of the room. He's in civilian dress. He doesn't know the full story. He never asked, not because he wasn't curious, but because he respected what silence means in my world. And right now, that silence feels heavier than any uniform I've ever worn. I reach the front row. My father is there standing now, but not because he chose to. Someone behind him must have whispered something. Or maybe it was instinct, the kind you can't shake even after retirement. He doesn't look at me. He looks at the men. One of them, second from the left, adjusts his collar. Another near the back has tears welling in his eyes. None of them speak. None of them break rank, but I can feel them, not behind me like a wall, but beside me. As if for the first time in my life, I'm not standing alone. A woman in the third pew leans to whisper, is she really? She doesn't finish her sentence. She doesn't have to. The answer is already standing all around her. A moment later, the pastor clears his throat. The room tries to settle, but no one dares break the posture, the line, the stillness. Not yet. It's in that exact second, with the weight of eyes, history shame, and quiet admiration pressing into the walls, that I let myself take a full breath. 3 years ago, I made a decision that changed everything. I lived with the consequences. I carried the silence. I wore the disgrace. And I never said a word. But today, without planning, without fanfare, without a single speech, something has shifted. The air has changed. My father, still stiff, finally blinks. Then slowly he lowers his gaze to the floor. It is the first gesture of surrender I've ever seen from him, and I say nothing. Because the truth is, this moment isn't about him. It's not about me either. It's about the 196 men who didn't have to come, but did. The ones who didn't owe me anything, but stood. and about the part of me I thought I had lost that somehow stood with them. I was never supposed to wear the uniform, not according to my father. He used to say it like a joke, but it never landed like one. One military man in the house is enough, sweetheart. Maybe try diplomacy. He said that the night I announced I had applied to the Naval Academy, I was 17. The dinner table went quiet. My brother choked on his soda. My mother didn't look up from her plate. I smiled anyway. My father didn't. He spent the next week pointing out schools with strong public policy programs and reminding me that military service was hard on women, especially the delicate kind. As if I hadn't spent my childhood listening to his stories, tracing the outlines of his campaign ribbons with my eyes while he watched football in silence. As if I hadn't memorized the creases in his uniform before I even knew what rank they meant. He never outright forbade it. That wasn't his style. He just made sure I knew what kind of daughter he thought he deserved and what kind I was not. I got into the academy. I got through it too, not at the top of my class, but not far from it. I specialized in naval operations, then later in fleet command. I chose a track most men avoided. The long haul, the offshore deployments, the command billets no one wanted. I learned how to hold a ship's silence longer than most men could hold their breath. He didn't attend my commissioning ceremony, sent a text instead, "Stay safe." He didn't mean it as affection. He meant it as a warning. I heard the subtext loud and clear. Don't fail. Don't embarrass me. Over the next 10 years, I rose faster than most. I didn't ask for help. I didn't take easy tours. I rotated through commands the hard way, forward deployed minimal staff, politically sensitive regions. I earned the kind of respect that came in long silences, not applause. And still, he said nothing. Not when I made lieutenant. Not when I took my first command. Not when I was awarded a medal for operational excellence in the Pacific. At one point, I started to believe he just wasn't watching, or maybe he had truly written me off, tucked me away in a mental drawer labeled disappointment, stubborn, not a real soldier. Then came the promotion. Rear Admiral youngest in my unit. One of the youngest in naval history. It was the kind of headline that makes people pause at airports, the kind that gets you questions at family gatherings. Only we didn't have family gatherings anymore. He didn't call. My mother did quietly, said he had seen the news but had nothing to say. Nothing. Not even congratulations. Somewhere in those years, the silence had turned from disapproval to erasure. It wasn't just that he didn't see me. It was that he didn't want to. There's one moment I can't forget. Christmas 2 years before everything broke. I came home in uniform, not as a statement, just because I was flying back from active duty. I hadn't changed. I walked in snow on my shoulders, duffel still slung over one side. My father was in his chair, sipping something amber. He didn't look up, just said, "Could have worn something more appropriate. People will think you're playing soldier." That was the first time he said it out loud. Playing soldier. As if the ribbons were plastic, as if the stripes were stickers, as if the deployments, the missions, the losses weren't real because they came from me. I didn't answer. I just walked past him and went to the kitchen, wiping melting snow off my sleeves. I remember the silence louder than anything he said. It was around that time I stopped sending updates. Promotions came and went. Operations blurred. I was building something he never wanted to see. And I thought maybe that was enough. Maybe I didn't need his approval. Until the mission that changed everything. Until the one moment where I could have turned away and didn't. The one moment where his voice, even in its absence, almost made me choose the safe thing, the obedient thing, instead of the right thing. That's what this story is really about. Not the uniform, not the title, not even the 196 men who stood for me. It's about the distance between who we are and who we're told we're not allowed to be, and what it takes to cross that space in silence. It started with static. A pulse of interference broke through our comms at 0314 hours short, jagged wrong. Naval traffic doesn't sound like that. Pirates don't either. But I recognized the rhythm instantly. Distress code. Level 6. Encrypted. Seal origin. I was off the Horn of Africa captaining the USS Halberd, a destroyer-class vessel with one job that month: deterrence. Push back radar threats. Keep commercial lanes open. Smile politely at satellites pretending not to watch us. My crew was lean, most under 30-some green, none stupid. We'd spent months running drills for engagements that would never happen. Except now, something was happening. The signal had come from 70 miles southwest, somewhere off the coast of Puntland, a zone we weren't authorized to enter without diplomatic clearance. Even our drones didn't go there. But the message wasn't ambiguous. SEAL Unit 9-1, requesting emergency extract, 2 vessels closing, repeat code gray, immediate threat to all. We patched it through a secure line to Fleet Command, waited. 17 minutes passed, then the reply came, "Do not proceed, stand down, area outside engagement authority, local forces notified." I stared at the words for a long time. My XO Lieutenant Dane leaned in close. "That's a kill zone. They won't make it 10 more minutes." He wasn't wrong. According to charts, there was a channel shallow old and half erased by shifting seabed. But I'd studied that coastline during a year-long assignment in Djibouti. I knew its rhythm. I knew how the tides played games with sonar. More importantly, I knew we were the closest help those men had. I keyed into the command line again, tried one last request. This time I was more specific, offering fast-track extract under blackout, tactical risk minimal, no engagement, no weapons. The reply was colder than the sea spray on deck. Final, negative. Command responsibility will not be transferred. Maintain current ops, which meant if I went in, I'd go in alone. Outside orders, outside protection. If I failed, it would be the end of my command. My career. And worse, my father would be right. Disobeying orders is a line you don't cross in the Navy unless you're damn sure what's on the other side. I could feel it in my stomach, the split. On one side, the rule, the chain of command, the comfort of caution. On the other, 196 men backs to the sea, cornered and silent except for one last flicker of encrypted breath. I turned to Dane. "Ready Ghost protocol. Reboot sonar tracking. Pull up the Gulf Shelf tide maps." Quietly. He looked at me. Not surprised, not nervous. "We're doing this. We're not leaving them." No alarm sounded. No bells rang. Just a shift in the room in the air in my chest. Within 20 minutes, USS Halberd began rerouting under blackout navigation, sliding into international waters like a rumor. By 0400, we would reach the edge of the shelf, a drop-off no one had tested in years. By 0500, we'd be either heroes or ghosts. By 0410, we had eyes on the channel, if you could call it that. On satellite, it looked like a crack barely wide enough to thread a skiff. But sonar gave us a ghost reading uneven seabed coral outcrops, unpredictable currents. Exactly the kind of terrain pirates avoided. Exactly the kind of terrain I needed. "If they're still breathing, they're behind that reef," Dane said, pointing to a cluster of static on the screen. "And if they're not," I asked, "then we'll be the next ghosts." No one laughed. I called a quiet briefing with my combat systems officer sonar chief and 2 petty officers from our small craft unit. I explained what we were doing and, more importantly, why. "This isn't sanctioned. This isn't protected. If you need to step back, now's your moment." No one moved. They didn't salute. They didn't cheer. Just nodded once and walked off to prepare. At 0430, we deployed 2 RHIBs, rigid inflatable boats retrofitted with sonar dampeners, and a ghosting system we'd never tested outside simulations. Our divers, 3 of the best I had, went in first, armed with low-frequency beacons. Their mission was brutal in its simplicity. Find the SEALs, tag the survivors, get them moving toward the reef cut, buy them 20 minutes. Meanwhile, from the Halberd, we deployed a disinformation pattern. Bursts of false radar echoes bouncing off shallow ridges to simulate movement 8 nautical miles east. Pirates rely on cheap Chinese radar jittery, overreactive, easy to fool. At 0442, we heard the first pop in the headset, a tag signal. Alive. At least some of them. Dane turned to me, eyes sharp. "They're coming. Fast." What followed wasn't smooth. It wasn't clean. A squall hit from the southeast, pushing tide against the reef wall. One of our RHIBs nearly capsized in a cross-current. The comms line blinked in and out. Twice we lost the beacon signal, but then shapes began to appear, shadowed, crawling over the water like ghosts through mist. One by one, the seals emerged from the channel, soaked, bruised, bleeding, but alive. We pulled them aboard, first 10, then 30, then 50. They didn't ask questions, they didn't speak, they just nodded like they knew this was borrowed time. By 0503, the last man was on board, 196. We left the way, we came silent, low, unregistered. At 0527, as the first pink threads of dawn bled over the horizon, we powered up full comms. Dane looked at me, unsure whether to smile or brace for what came next. We both knew what this meant. We disobeyed orders, crossed a line, saved lives. It wouldn't matter. I filed the report myself. Every word typed clean. No drama, no embellishment. Just truth. Fleet Command called by noon, then intelligence, then legal. By evening, I was ordered to stand down from command pending formal review. No ceremony, no confrontation. Just a silence colder than steel. The men we rescued were debriefed separately. Some returned to active duty, some were reassigned. All were instructed not to contact me. Not one of them did. Not then. And as for my father, he read about the disciplinary action in a classified chain passed through retired officers. He called me just once. Not to ask what happened. Not to ask if I was safe. Now the whole Navy knows what I've known since you were a teenager, he said. You're not built for command. Then he hung up. No one came to my defense. Not in public, not in private, not even the men I saved. No one said the word demotion. They didn't have to. Standing down from command might as well be a scarlet letter in a system built on silence and structure. You don't have to be publicly shamed. You just stop getting the calls. Stop getting invited to briefings. Your name stops appearing on rotation lists. You vanish. Nicely. Officially, I was reassigned to a logistics unit on the West Coast. Unofficially, I was placed in cold storage, one of those positions where nothing happens because nothing is allowed to happen. 4 walls, 3 screens, 2 subordinates, and an inbox that never filled. I took it without protest. They didn't want to fight, and I didn't want pity. I kept my uniform pressed, kept my office spotless. I arrived early, stayed late, answered every irrelevant email with precision, smiled at every junior officer who avoided my eyes in the hallway, and I waited. Waited for what I don't know. Redemption apology. Some late-night call from a SEAL who would say, "Hey, I'm alive because of you," but it never came. None of them called. None of them wrote. None of them reached out, not even in code. It wasn't betrayal. It was protocol. They were ordered to stay silent, and they followed orders. That was the irony. I had broken the chain to save them, and now that same chain held their tongues in place. I couldn't blame them, but it still carved into me like salt water. My father didn't speak to me after that phone call. Not for weeks, then months. I sent a gift for his birthday. It was returned unopened. I called him when Mom was hospitalized for a minor procedure. He let it ring. He didn't come to my promotion ceremony, Rear Admiral, even under shadow. Didn't reply to the announcement of my engagement. Didn't acknowledge the wedding invitation. He told my brother in passing, I don't do theater. That's what he called it, my life. Theater. And honestly, maybe it was. Maybe it was all just a very long monologue performed in uniform in front of empty seats. I stopped wearing my ribbons outside formal events. I stopped using the word command in conversation. I stopped looking in the mirror and seeing an officer. I just saw a name on a list marked problematic, too ambitious, unsuitable for leadership. I spent my nights reading after-action reports, filing requisition orders, checking sonar maintenance records no one asked for. It was the only way to feel like I still had a role. And slowly, quietly, I started to believe maybe my father had been right all along. The worst moment wasn't being reassigned. It wasn't even the silence. It was the memorial. 6 months after the operation, one of the SEALs from that mission died not in combat but in a training accident. His name was Petty Officer Grant Keller. He was 28. I remembered his eyes. He was the 3rd man we pulled from the reef that night, still bleeding, half conscious. I asked to attend the service. I wasn't on the guest list. I wasn't allowed to speak. I watched from the back of the chapel as other officers told stories, thanked his bravery, recalled missions I wasn't supposed to know about. No one mentioned that he had nearly drowned in international waters while command stood still. No one mentioned who pulled him out. Afterward, his mother passed by me in the parking lot. She didn't recognize me. She thanked the officers in dress whites near the door. I didn't approach her. I didn't want to make it about me, but I sat in my car for over an hour afterward. Engine off, window down, just still. That was the night I took off my insignia at home and didn't put it back on for weeks. People think low points come with noise, yelling tears, slammed doors. But mine came with nothing. No sound, no protest, just a long, slow, quiet disappearance. And I let it happen. Because I thought maybe, just maybe, if I went quiet long enough, someone else would speak. It happened quietly. One Monday morning, 3 years after the operation, I opened my inbox and found a single nondescript email from a Navy liaison I barely remembered. Subject reclassification of Operation Gray Reef status, cleared for limited release action summary attached. Official statement to follow. I opened the file. 4 paragraphs, no apology, no headlines, just a cold clinical correction. Rear Admiral Alexis Monroe acted within the bounds of situational command authority during Operation Gray Reef. Her actions resulted in the successful extraction of 196 Navy personnel with 0 fatalities. Previous disciplinary actions have been retroactively expunged. That was it. 3 years of silence, of shame, of being erased, folded neatly into a memo that most people would delete without reading. No ceremony, no medal, no phone call. I sat with it for a while. Then I closed the screen. They say vindication is supposed to feel like a rush, a wave of satisfaction of finally being seen. But it didn't feel like that at all. It felt still. Like finding an old photo of yourself and realizing you're finally seeing it without flinching. I didn't forward the email to anyone. Not to my fiancé, not to my mother, and certainly not to my father. I didn't update my social media. I didn't call in favors. I just sat in that tiny office, the one they'd forgotten to reassign me from, and stared out the window as the morning light stretched across my desk like something returning home after years away. That evening, I pulled my uniform from the back of the closet, polished the buttons, refastened the ribbons, adjusted the collar, not for ceremony, for closure. 1 week later, I was getting married. The guest list was finalized, the seating chart was printed. My brother had been texting me with small logistical headaches, who was vegetarian, who hated shellfish, who had a fear of small chapels. He also said this: "Dad says he's coming." Told me not to expect smiles. I didn't respond. He wasn't coming for me. He was coming to keep up appearances. That had always mattered more than truth. And I wasn't doing this for him either. I wasn't wearing white. I wasn't wearing pearls. I was wearing the uniform, not to provoke, not to prove anything, just to be exactly who I had always been now without having to explain it. My fiancé asked me the night before, "Are you sure about the uniform? I've never been more sure of anything in my life." And if he says something again, I smiled. Then I'll still be standing. He didn't press further. That's why I loved him. He never asked for details, never needed the whole story to respect it. The morning of the ceremony, I stood in front of the mirror in full dress whites. I pinned my insignia without hesitation, laced my boots with calm fingers, stepped into sunlight not like a bride but like an officer. No drama, no triumph music, just alignment. Everything finally aligned. Outside, the cars were arriving. Inside, my name was being whispered, some with confusion, some with awe. And somewhere in the crowd, my father was probably waiting to see if I would flinch. He had no idea the story had already changed, and I had no interest in telling him, because some truths don't need to be spoken, they just need to be stood in. I arrived 5 minutes before the ceremony, not because I wanted to make a statement, I just didn't want to linger. I knew how these rooms worked. Long pauses gave people permission to whisper, so I stepped out of the car in full uniform. Dress whites, regulation heels, every button locked, every fold perfect. I walked straight toward the chapel doors without looking around. I could feel it, the shift. Eyes, quiet coughs, a waiter adjusting his gloves too quickly, one groomsman nudging another, All of it silent but thick like static before lightning. The first voice that met me wasn't the chaplain. It was his. "Really?" my father said, arms crossed, half smiling. "You're actually doing this in costume. I didn't break stride." He stepped slightly in my path, not blocking me, not touching me, but enough to make the pause feel loaded. Could have worn something respectful. You know, like a dress. Unless we're still pretending. Pretending. That word again. He said it softly, like a joke shared between friends, but it landed like a slap. My mother looked away. My brother shifted in place, pretending not to hear. The usher avoided eye contact. I looked directly at my father. He waited for a reaction. I gave him none. I stepped past him one boot after the other and walked into the chapel. The room was already full. Too full. The front pews held family. The middle friends commanders, a few civilians. The back was hazy, standing room only. I moved toward the aisle but stopped. There was movement, not a murmur, not a shuffle. Something tighter, deliberate. The back doors opened. A gust of air hit my shoulders. Then boots, heavy, synchronized. They walked in formation, tight, precise, like they'd practiced it, and they kept coming. Not 5, not 10, dozens. Navy SEALs, in dress blues. No introduction, no announcement. They filed into the aisles like shadows, uninvited, unnoticed, until that very moment. The chapel went silent. Even the pastor froze mid-sentence. And then, from somewhere in the back, one voice rang out. "Admiral on deck." It wasn't loud, but it cut through everything. And in response they stood. 196 men, straight, saluting, unblinking. The silence turned solid. No one dared move. Even my father. Especially him. I didn't turn around. I didn't smile. I just walked forward past the pews toward the altar. Each step echoed. My father, still frozen at the door, didn't speak. His mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. Someone behind me whispered, "She's the one who—" That mission, is this real? But the voice that mattered most said nothing, because for the first time in his life, he didn't have a script. He had been waiting years to humiliate me. He'd rehearsed the lines, practiced the smirk, sharpened the words. But now, with 196 men standing for me in unison, he had no place to speak from, no rank to hide behind, no authority to lean on, just silence. And finally, I let him sit in it. The moment held longer than anyone expected. Even the pastor, flipping nervously through his binder, didn't know what to say. His opening line, whatever it was meant to be, had been swallowed whole by a single phrase, "Admiral on deck." The SEALs didn't move. They held their salute, and no one, not even the bride's father, dared tell them to stop. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel them. Their stillness hummed behind me like electricity trapped in glass. Every beat of it louder than my father's voice had ever been. He was still near the chapel doors, frozen mid-step, jaw clenched tight, the look of a man trying to do math in public and realizing the numbers don't add up. He hadn't read the memo. He didn't know the mission had been declassified. He didn't know I'd been cleared, exonerated, and reinstated. He didn't know the 196 men he thought had vanished into war were alive because I'd broken the chain of command he worshipped his entire life. And now they were here not to humiliate him, but to honor the woman he refused to see. One of the guests, a woman in a navy blue dress, maybe an aunt, leaned toward my brother. "What's going on? Why are they standing?" He didn't answer. He was watching Dad. We all were. Somewhere inside, he was scrambling, searching for context control command. The very thing he'd always held over me now, slipping through his fingers like seawater through rope. He looked at my uniform, my posture, my silence, and saw something he didn't recognize: power without permission. Honor without approval. A daughter who didn't need his blessing to belong. Then came the first break in the room. Rear Admiral Jesse Lane, a senior officer I hadn't spoken to in years, stood from the third row. Slowly, deliberately. He turned to face the back of the room, looked directly at the SEALs. Then, without a word, he saluted. A few rows back, someone gasped, not at the gesture but at the implication. A rear admiral in full dress publicly saluting not just enlisted men, but me. Others began to rise, quietly, not coordinated, not planned, like a ripple catching fire. A retired chief, a commander in civilian clothes, a former corpsman in a wheelchair who placed his hand over his heart. They rose, not out of ceremony, but out of clarity, because in that moment something had clicked. The mission, the silence, the file that was suddenly visible on DoD records just 1 week ago. Whispers began. Not loud, not chaotic, just threadbare phrases trying to fill the gaps. That was the Somali extraction. They said that op was unsanctioned. She was the one she saved all of them. I still hadn't said a word. I stood at the front of the chapel facing the altar, hands clasped behind my back as I had in so many briefings before. My fiancé reached for my hand gently but didn't squeeze. He knew what this was. It wasn't a moment. It was a reckoning. Behind me, the 196 SEALs lowered their salute in unison, then stepped back still in formation, still silent. That's when I turned. Not fully, just enough. Enough to meet my father's eyes across the sea of bodies. He hadn't moved. His arms were no longer crossed. His mouth, once ready to launch another barb, was set in a straight line. His face had gone from rigid to raw. He looked small, not in stature, but in story. A man outlived by the truth he tried to deny. And for a moment, just a flicker, I saw it in him, the realization. The collapse, the loss of certainty. He looked at the SEALs, then at me, then down, and he nodded. Not once. Not to me, but to something. Maybe the room, maybe the truth, maybe himself. The ceremony resumed eventually. The pastor found his place. My fiancé and I exchanged vows. The room returned to a kind of solemn stillness, the kind that follows a storm where even the birds go quiet. But the echo of that moment never left. It followed us into the reception where no one dared mention it aloud. It clung to the edges of every toast. It lived in the glances, the careful clinks of glasses, the silent looks passed between veterans who now saw me not as a question, but as an answer. After dinner, I stepped outside alone for air. The courtyard was empty except for 2 SEALs still in uniform standing near the edge of the fountain. They didn't approach, they just nodded once as I passed. I nodded back. No words exchanged. None needed. Because this was the only kind of speech that ever mattered to me. One that didn't ask for applause. Only presence. Back inside, my father had taken a seat near the rear. He didn't join the dance floor, didn't speak during the toasts, didn't pull me aside. But when I walked past him leaving for the evening, he stood. Not for long, not with flair. But he stood and gave me the smallest of nods. It wasn't approval. It wasn't forgiveness. It was surrender. And I accepted it. Not with a smile, not with words. Just by walking past it this time without looking back. 2 weeks after the wedding, a letter arrived. No return address, no name on the envelope. Just my name, handwritten careful. Almost too careful. I knew the handwriting. I held it for a full day before opening it. Left it on the corner of my desk under a glass paperweight shaped like a compass. North always pointed left in that thing. It was never accurate, but I liked it. I liked the reminder that sometimes direction isn't a straight line. I opened the letter on a Tuesday night alone, long after the rest of the world had gone to bed. It was short, only 1 sentence. I saw it now. You were never pretending. No signature, just that. I read it once, then again. And then I folded it gently and placed it in a drawer. I rarely opened the one with the medal. I never wore the one awarded to me after they cleared my record, the one I received by courier instead of ceremony. Some things don't need to be displayed. Some things are only meant to be known. I never wrote back. I never brought it up at family dinners. My mother asked once gently if the 2 of us had spoken. I told her, not exactly. She didn't press. I think she understood not just the silence, but the kind of silence it was. Not a wall, but a space. one that had been empty for years and now wasn't. Not filled with conversation or resolution, just acknowledgement. That's all I ever wanted. Not praise, not applause. Just to no longer be erased. I went back to sea 2 months later, not for punishment, not for escape, just to breathe. Water had always been the only place I could hear myself without interference. The open deck, the hum of the hull, the rhythm of waves meeting steel, it all made sense in a way land never quite did. I took command again. A new crew, new protocols. But some things stayed the same. They called me Admiral, but not because they had to, because they wanted to. Every once in a while I get a message from one of the Wonder 96. Not all at once, not often. Just a quiet ping. A photo. A thank you from a wife I've never met. A kid born 9 months after the rescue now walking grinning wrapped in a navy blue blanket. They never mention the operation directly, but they don't have to. We carry it in the way we show up or don't. And when people ask me what changed after the declassification, I always smile. Because the truth is nothing changed. Not really. I was always who I said I was. The world just took a while to catch up. My father hasn't said much since the wedding, but I've seen him sit a little straighter when I enter a room. I've seen him lower his voice when the conversation turns to women in uniform. I've seen him open the door once before I reached the handle. And I've seen something new in his eyes when we stand side by side and don't speak. Respect. Not built on pride, but on proof. He doesn't call me soldier anymore. He calls me Alexis. And sometimes when he thinks no one's listening, he calls me Admiral. There's no medal for that. No citation. No formal recognition. But it's the highest honor I've ever received. Because I earned it in silence. And I earned it alone.